In the criminal justice system, the people are represented by two separate yet equally important groups: the police who investigate crime and the
forensic psychologists.
These are their stories.
No. I think more times than not, I feel my evidence is ignored. And that's partly it's in the nature of the evidence I give, because you were referring earlier to evidence of facial mapping, for example, facial identification. And in those cases, you have one expert who's saying the defendant is the suspect, is the perpetrator. They are the defendant is guilty, essentially. And then you have me saying the technique used to make that determination is invalid. And they're not equivalent arguments. One is very powerful, very strong, it's very direct, and I'm simply casting doubt. It's not that I can say, or would ever want to say, that the defendant is not guilty or is not the person you can see in the CCTV. I'm just saying the technique used by the other expert is not appropriate. And they're unequal. I think for that reason, my evidence doesn't always carry as much weight as the other side. I think it's a challenge for me, therefore, to try and connect with the jury in terms of that sort of evidence. Sometimes I can see them disinterested in what I'm saying. It's boring by comparison. Yeah, I think the legal system is trying, and I think we've made some significant gains in the last few years, and the legal system and the forensic science community are really trying to come to terms with the nature of evidence, scientific evidence, and to present more scientific evidence. But as I mentioned, I think there's an incompatibility sometimes between the legal system and science, and they don't go together very easily because they're seeking different kind of answers. And I think that's why it's difficult sometimes. I think in the end it's not feasible. And I think it's to do with the fact that the legal system, it took me a really long time to realise what's actually a very simple and obvious thing, I think, for most people, but the legal system is just the decision-making process. It's a system that's set up to make decisions even in the absence of evidence. You know, even if there isn't sufficient evidence to make a determination, someone has to decide what we're going to do in this particular case. And that's why we have jurors. You know, the little black box that's closed and we shouldn't look inside is because they will make a decision for you. And scientists don't work that way. Scientists try and amass evidence and collect evidence and keep going until they can satisfy themselves that they understand how the world works. And I think in the end those two are incompatible. Unfortunately, those kind of decisions are mostly political. But there are policy-making units who increasingly employ forensic psychologists. So units such as the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research, who do a lot of work evaluating systems and reforms to the law and presenting that evidence to government. And they increasingly employ forensic psychologists because they recognise the skills that forensic psychologists have, both in understanding human behaviour but also in terms of statistics, which is actually quite a useful skill psychologists bring with them. So they're increasingly involved in that process, and so hopefully we influence those political decisions through that route. But usually change happens because some politician is pushed into a corner and stands up and says that my government will do something about this. And unfortunately, as a result, it's quite rare for policy decisions, particularly within the criminal justice system, to be made on an evidence-based system. The notion of an evidence-based criminal justice system is quite an unusual notion. I think the critical thing about jurors is that they should be as representative as possible. So people always try and get out of jury service, but I always try and encourage people not to escape jury service. That jury service is really important for lots of reasons, but one is because it provides a direct connection between ordinary people and the legal system. In the same way that it was very influential to me, like kind of changed my life seeing a real case, I think it would be important for lots of other people to see what real law looks like. Public always feel that judges are too lenient, but interestingly jurors I think usually don't feel that way. People who've actually sat through a case often aren't baying for blood, but rather often feeling, as I did at the end of the case I was talking about earlier, often feeling that what you've got is rather pathetic, pitiful people who need help as much as they need punishment. Ooh, lots. As I say, with colleagues from law, we're at the moment particularly working on trying to increase the science basis behind lots of forensic science evidence in court. Everything from DNA to fingerprints to facial mapping, all of those kinds of evidence. At the moment, that kind of evidence is appearing in court without being validated. So we're working on trying to demonstrate what these people can and can't do. So the stuff you see on CSI usually is completely unvalidated. Even fingerprinting, until a few months ago, it wasn't even clear that fingerprint experts could actually determine whether two prints came from the same person or not. It's psychologists who have shown that they can do that. It's just as well they can do that because we've been relying on that evidence for 100 years in court. But so for me that's particularly important. It can be frustrating at times because what seems natural as a scientist doesn't seem natural to the legal system. So when I give presentations about the sorts of work we do, when I present that to other psychologists, they're always amazed, or they can't see the problem. Why is it a problem that forensic science evidence should be validated? It's a no-brainer for a scientist, but for the legal system that's a huge issue. So yeah, it can be frustrating. I think lawyers think the scientists don't understand what the real issues are, and I think to some extent that's true. We don't understand enough about how the law works, which is why it's so good to work with lawyers, I think, rather than sort of pitch ourselves against them, which I think would be a stupid thing to do. No, I think it's more that, as I say, that the two worlds are just very different in terms of how they see problems. It's also a shame that lawyers tend to typically come from arts backgrounds. If you ask lawyers, barristers in particular, they're hugely intelligent people, very, very smart people, barristers and judges, but typically their background at university was not in sciences, it was in arts, and that's a shame.